Welcome to the beginning of our residency for One City, One Book of author Laura Carney. My name is Beth Sheffield. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator, and we are so thankful that you are here tonight. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, we will stop the Facebook streaming feed when we start our Q&A. We've been doing One City, One Book since 2002. Every year we ask our community to all come together and read the same book. And this year it's My Father's List by Laura Carney. Now it's my pleasure to bring back to the stage, to bring Leander Croker up for some words of welcome from the Greensboro Public Library.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Leander Croker. I'm Deputy Director for Greensboro Public Library, and it's a joy to welcome you all here this evening on behalf of Bridget Blanton and the Greensboro Public Library Foundation. One City, One Book is such a special time in our community. It's a time for us to come together to talk about the hard things, the hopeful things, and everything in between. My Father's List is the ideal catalyst to inspire these conversations for us to go out on our own adventures and cross some of these things off of our bucket list. Thank you. I forget I'm short sometimes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting your public library, and thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now, it is my pleasure to reintroduce to some and welcome to others, internationally acclaimed master storyteller, artist, educator, recording artist, and children's author, Donna Washington, who will be opening tonight's program. Donna has captivated audiences at festivals, schools, and libraries, and even some of us in this room, across the United States and around the world. A prolific creator, she has produced numerous award-winning storytelling CDs recognized by Parents' Choice, Storytelling World, iParenting, Children's Music Web, and more. She is also co-founder of the national nonprofit Artists Standing Together, which supports artists through challenging times. Now, help me welcome back to the stage, Donna Washington.
Okay, this story actually has something to do with the program. So, legacy. When the Africans were first taken out of West Africa, they were originally taken to the Caribbean, and when they got there, they weren't allowed to speak their own languages or worship their own religions or tell their stories. But they wanted to keep Anansi the spider, who was the West African trickster. They turned him into a woman, Aunt Nancy. If you go to the Caribbean, there's all these great stories about this really clever woman named Aunt Nancy, who's a trickster. It's Anansi the spider. When the West Africans were brought here to North America, the same thing was true. They couldn't speak their own languages. They were not allowed to worship their own religions, not allowed to tell their stories. They wanted to keep their trickster Anansi. They turned him into a rabbit. He is the basis of Brer Rabbit. Brer Rabbit jumped all over the country, getting mixed up with all of the tricksters that came in from Europe, that came in from Asia, that were from the First Nations people, and in the 40s, they all turned into Bugs Bunny. Whenever you see Bugs Bunny, you are in fact seeing a very small piece of Africa. And so let me begin this story, which is called The West Indies, with a Brer story, which only seems fitting to me. Now, one morning, Brer Rabbit was going on down the road. He was having himself a good morning. He was not looking where he was going. He put his foot in a trap and slung himself upside down. His head where his feet ought to have been, his feet were where his head ought to have been, and there he was, swinging betwixt the heavens and the earth. And at first, he was afraid he was going to fall. And then he was afraid he wasn't going to fall. And he started slinging his arms around, screaming, hooping, and hollering. And along the way comes Brer Bear. And y'all might have met someone like Brer Bear. He's really big on the outside. He moves kind of slow on the inside. He did this. What are you doing? And Brer Rabbit took that critter one, just looked him up and down and said, I'm making $5 a minute scaring crows. And Brer Bear said, well, I'd like to make $5 a minute. And Brer Rabbit said, well, that's all right. I done made all the money I want to. All you got to do is untie my leg, tie yourself upside down, and sling your own arms around, and you will be making $5 a minute. And Brer Bear said, okay. And that's what he did. He untied Brer Rabbit, tied himself upside down, and slung himself up between the heavens and the earth. He was so big his head was bumping up against the ground. He started slinging his arms around. Whoa. Now, Brer Rabbit wanted to leave, but mostly he just wanted to see what was going to happen. So he stayed. Down off of Cochipee Hill, here comes Brer Fox. He saw that great big old bear hanging there. He said, "What are you doing?" Because he was the one who set the trap in the first place. Why are you hanging in my trap? And Brer Bear said, no, I'm making $5 a minute scaring crows. And Brer Fox said, no, you're not. You making a fool out of yourself. That's what you're doing. Don't nobody like to be called a fool. So Brer Bear untied himself, picked up a big stick, and crunked Brer Fox right on top of the head. And those two critters got to scrapping, and Brer Rabbit laughed so hard he near about wet his pants. Now, I grew up with traditional stories like that, and I always thought Brer Rabbit was a mythical character. But I grew up with him. My father's an unusual man. He's 6'4". He has black belts in judo, karate, hapkido, tensudo, and taekwondo. He knows how to use nunchucks and swords, and the Army thought it was a fabulous idea to teach him how to shoot rifles. He is the blackest human being I've ever seen in my life. He looks like midnight with eyeballs. And he is a very big, broad-shouldered man. And during every day of his work life, he had to wear a uniform, and on the weekends, his guilty secret emerged. This man did not know how to dress himself. He would wear sandals and black socks, a ratty pair of shorts, and a nice T-shirt my mother had ironed. We were ashamed to be with him when we were in middle school. But my dad had an attitude about America, and it was this: I fought for this country. You're going to see it. So he bought this great big van that sat on like 26 people. They don't even make them that big for domestic consumption anymore. And when we went across the country, the first 2 seats in that van would be taken out and put in the moving truck with all of our whole baggage. And there are 7 kids in my family. We would sit 2 to a seat, and the last one would lay in the back. And the place where we'd taken the 2 seats out in the front, the dogs and the ferret would travel there. And we had an Alsatian shepherd, which is a long-haired shepherd. He looks like a wolf. He had silver and black hair, and he was huge. And it was the 80s. All of us had giant Jerry curl afros. And my mother is 5'1", and she's very light-skinned, and Martha Stewart could have taken notes. She was always completely made up and completely done. And the way we went across country is we would get up at dark 30, which is before the sun. We'd get in the car, we'd drive all day. My father would get in the car, he becomes Mr. Happy Driving Man. Ha ha! Ha ha! Look at that, look at that, look at that. Ha ha! He was a historian. He loved America, and he would show us everything. And we didn't pay any attention to him at all as we were going across the country. And my mother would try to keep us from killing each other. Put that down. Don't make me come back there. What are you doing? And we would sit there and try to kill each other in the back seat. Now, when I was in middle school, we moved from Oklahoma to Virginia by way of Florida. And at one point, we got where we were going so late, my mother didn't have time to get fruit or anything to pass out for us in the morning. And we got up so early that there was nothing open. And my father was in his ridiculous outfit, his black socks and sandals, his ratty shorts, his nice T-shirt. My mother came out of the hotel, she was wrinkled. All 7 of us came out of the hotel. Not a one of us had combed those afros. They were twisted all over our heads. We walked our dogs. We got into the van. We all fell asleep. My father did not care. He was driving in the dark. Look at that, look at that, look at that. Ha ha! My mother was sitting next to him. A few hours later, the sun came up. We all woke up. I don't know if you've ever been near your brothers and sisters when you're hungry. World War III broke out in the back of the van. Mommy's touching me. Mommy's got my thing. Mommy's talking to me. Mommy's looking at me. Mommy's breathing near me. And my mother just turned around and said, "Shut up!" She turned to my father. "We have to get some coffee and feed these children." My father said, "Okay." And he turned off the road. Now, we were on a little 2-lane highway somewhere in mountains. And now my mother says, "Where are you going?" Because, you know, she'd opened up the glove box. She got a big map out. She was trying to figure out where we were supposed to go. My father had turned off the road onto a barely paved road in the mountains somewhere. All 7 of us got our faces plastered up against the window. And now we're like, we moved from a barely paved road into kind of a rocky road. Where are we going? It's an adventure. And finally we come barreling out of the underbrush. And we are in front of what looks like something from a movie scene. It's like a 5 and dime type of thing, like old saloon from like cowboy days. The wood is all weathered and dark, and the shingles are peeled up on the roof. But we see in the window they will take an American Express card. They'll take checks, so we don't have to use our cash. It must be like I don't know, hiker's station. We don't know. There's roads, but they're not paved. And there were 2 elderly white gentlemen playing checkers on the front porch, and I can just imagine what they saw. This huge bunch of comes out of the underbrush. And at one side comes this giant black man. On the other side, this very short lady. And then the back door opens. Out come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 heavily afroed children with a wolf on a leash. By the time we finished walking the dogs, they were gone. We go in, my mother stops us all. She rubs her finger across one of the cabinets like a white glove test. She says, "Don't get anything that isn't sealed in a wrapper. We're going to have a Hostess for breakfast." We run for the Hostess ding-dongs and the Hostess Twinkies and the Hostess cupcakes. My mother gets a Coke. She will not get the coffee in this place. My father, always one for the local color, gets a great big jar of pickled pig's feet, which I'm happy to tell you about after he'd eaten about half, he found a big turd in the bottom. We went over, we put all this stuff on the counter, and the 2 guys who were playing checkers have come inside, and they're standing on either side of a man whose name is Sam, and we know that because it's on his pocket, Sam. And Sam does not start bringing up the food. He just looks at all of us, and then he says, "Y'all ain't supposed to be in here." And he reached underneath the cabinet, and we heard click. And my father looked at my mother and looked at all of us. And my mother looked at him, and my father drew himself up to his 6'4" height and said, "No, we are from the West Indies, and we are just traveling in your country." And Sam says, "Well, welcome to America," and starts ringing up the food. He rings up the Hostess ding-dongs and the Hostess Twinkies and the Hostess cupcakes. My mother's face is just flat, but we are trying so hard not to laugh. Did he not hear us talking when we came in here? Sam is going to be the dumbest man in the world. My father just keeps talking about the big sky and the big mountains, and he's just ringing stuff up, and Sam and the 2 guys are just nodding at him, and they're putting stuff in bags, and as we're going out, they go, "Well, you enjoy your visit, you come again." My father says, "Thank you." And we go out, and we get in the car, and all 7 of us fall out. We are laughing so hard. My parents don't say anything. My dad manages to reverse and move that big van down, and we start going back down that mountain, down the rocky road, back to the barely paved thing. We're back on the highway, and then the best thing happens. My mother starts handing out Hostess. And we break into Hostess Twinkies and Hostess cupcakes and Hostess ding-dongs. It's the best breakfast ever. And I think about that moment in my childhood when my father, who has been trained to kill you 20 different ways just by breathing on you, funny, could have made any decision in the world. At that moment, I had seen Brer Rabbit doing some of his finest work.
It's now my pleasure to welcome to our stage our moderator for this evening, Laura Beth Vietor. Laura Beth is a strong advocate for libraries and all things reading. Through her pastime, she started LB, the Lover of Books, and hosts author chats on her BookTube channel, LB, Lover of Books, where she has amassed over 25,000 hours watched. She's had the opportunity to interview over 100 debut authors to best-selling authors. So welcome, Laura Beth Vietor.
Donna, thank you so much for opening that up. That was the perfect way to start our Family Legacy Destiny panel. So thank you so much for that. Let's give her another round of applause. It's my pleasure to introduce the other 2/3 of the panel. So, Melanie Brooks, she is the author of the memoir, A Hard Silence, One Daughter Remaps Family, Grief, and Faith When HIV/AIDS Changes It All. And she also wrote Writing Hard Stories, Celebrated Memoirist Who Shaped Art from Trauma. She teaches creative nonfiction at the MFA programs at Bay Path University and Western Connecticut State University, and also professional writing at Northeastern University. She holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Southern Maine Stone Coast Writing Program and a certificate in narrative medicine from Columbia University. She's had numerous interviews and essays on topics ranging from illness and grief to parenting and aging, published by none other than the Boston Globe, HuffPost, Yankee Magazine, the Globe and Mail, Psychology Today, the Washington Post, Miss Magazine, Creative Nonfiction, and other notable publications. She lives in New Hampshire with her husband, 2 children when they are home from university, and a chocolate lab. Let's welcome Melanie. All right, to fill that final third seat, I'm here to introduce Laura Carney. She is a writer and a copy editor in New York. Her work as a copy editor has been primarily in magazines for 20 years, such as Good Housekeeping, People, and GQ. Her best-selling book, My Father's List, How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free, was published by Post Hill Press in June 2023. She has appeared on CBS Sunday Morning, NPR, and NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, among other TV programs. She has been covered by the Washington Post, AARP, Woman's Day, and Maria Shriver's Sunday paper, among other publications. My Father's List is one of the best books of 2023 in Real Simple magazine. She co-founded and teaches the Pioneer Project with Do the Thing founder Stacy Lauren for Melissa Gilbert's brand, Modern Prairie. Let's give a big round of applause for Laura Carney. All right, I am so ready to interview this panel. Thank you, ladies, for joining.
Thank you. Really nice introductions.
This is our attempt at a coffee table talk in our living room, so I hope y'all are here to enjoy this little peek. But first, I want to talk. Okay, let me find my notes. All right, here we go. Laura, you wrote, "It's only when we are comfortable in our skin that we are truly free." Do you believe that this is a prerequisite to writing a memoir, or maybe is it a goal by process's end? And can y'all each talk about your comfort level when you're talking about such intimate matters?
That's a great question. I'm trying to remember what part of the book I wrote that in. I think that probably was when I peed my pants while running a marathon.
I think so.
Which, I mean, what better moment to learn how to be comfortable in your own skin, right?
Exactly.
That was one of the very first list items, and I almost stopped when that happened because it just seemed it was all men around me when I was running. I was running down Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, and that was the first time. It was a few months after I had started my project to do my dad's bucket list. That was the first time when it occurred to me, like, oh, that's a lesson I needed. And I don't think my dad had a problem with that because he was an entertainer and he was a singer and he was a comedian. And I think he was actually very comfortable in his skin, but I did. I was always trying to please other people and trying to fit in. And that was basically my goal in life. Like, I must fit in. So there's just, there's an aspect to writing in general, but particularly I think writing memoir that requires that you let go of that need to fit in. Because to use your voice means you have to stop worrying about what you look like to everybody else. And so I think that's what I meant when I said that. I think that one of the things I said was the only way you can let yourself be seen is if you let yourself be heard. Might have been the reverse, but they go together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Do either of y'all have something to add to that? Because I think it's so important to talk about comfort level when you are discussing such intimate items such as your father's illness, slavery, family.
Well, I'll say that I don't know that it's necessarily a prerequisite for the writing, and I think most people go into writing personal stories without that being comfortable in their own skin. And I think it's, you know, a lot of us are writing about things that we've never been able to talk about, or we've never been able to share with other people. And so it's a process we have to learn kind of as we put down the words. I think that we're starting to understand our stories, and in understanding our stories, we're beginning to understand ourselves. And in doing that, we become more authentic people.
And when you talk about telling stories, and as well as writing them, at least for my genre, when you're talking about bearing yourself in front of people, one of the things I usually talk to young storytellers about is getting a little distance on something before you put it on stage or before you tell it. Because you don't know what your stories are about until you actually tell them or write them. And you have a little distance so that you can see them. Part of what telling stories about your life or about really hard things for storytellers definitely is that you have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to do it. And so when you were writing a story, you're putting yourself at a place of extreme vulnerability. So when you were talking about running and peeing at the same time, yeah, you have to be willing to be that vulnerable to tell a story. Otherwise, you're commenting on yourself as opposed to living through something and learning from it.
That vulnerability, I think I want to talk about that a little bit more, because grief is such a central line in both of your memoirs, and I'm sure through your storytelling as well. So do you feel like that writing, you're becoming your authentic self, is that a way to help yourself cope when you're on this journey? Or do you find that elsewhere and then write through it?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I was actually just thinking about this the other day. I was thinking about how, you know, so much in life comes down to your own definitions of things. So I could have continued going down this path. I mean, it had been 13 years since my father died, and I could have continued just looking at that through a set list of definitions, right? It was a car crash. It was a distracted driver. It was the worst tragedy that had ever affected my family. My life was never the same again. But you know, there's this one interview I watched that I found really fascinating around the time I was starting to write my book, and it was with Anderson Cooper, and he spoke to Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert was talking. Do you know the interview?
I love this
Love
interview.
that interview.
If you haven't watched it, find it. It's a great interview.
Yeah, I mean, they were bonding over the fact that Anderson Cooper, I believe his mother had just died, and he lost his brother when he was a very young man. And Stephen Colbert, famously, his father and I believe one or two of his brothers all died in a plane crash. And what Stephen Colbert told Anderson Cooper when he was in the middle of saying, you know, it's like my life is in two parts. There's the part before she died, or he died, his brother, I forget which one he was talking about, but the part before they died and then the part after, as though he could never return to who he'd been. But Stephen Colbert said to him that the way he looked at his experience with loss was that if anything terrible could happen, anything wonderful could happen too. And that really resonated with me, because here I was doing my dad's bucket list, and it was like I was beginning to experience that. And as I worked through these items that were his dreams, like he wrote this as a young man at age 29, as I was getting to experience them as his daughter, there was something about all of it that was just now finally making sense. And I think that's the key. I think when someone dies, particularly traumatically, suddenly, you don't have any preparation for this. You have to find a way for it to make sense. And certainly writing helps that to happen, because I mean, there's parts of this book that I would procrastinate on. Like, I don't think I wrote about his funeral until 9 months in to writing the book. And it was only because I was stuck on a couch. I had foot surgery. I literally could not run away from myself any longer. But, you know, finally making myself take the painful parts and putting them inside of things like running a marathon, swimming across the French Broad River, surfing in the Pacific.
Jumping out of a plane.
Jumping out of an airplane, but also wonderful, fun memories of my dad when I was a child, that these new fun experiences were bringing up for me to the surface. Because now these are all parts of a larger story, my life was suddenly making sense, and that was what made the grief finally start to heal.
I love that. It's so cathartic. What do y'all think?
Well, I think that vulnerability, a lot of it when it's around grief is partly the way our society treats grief, right? We're people who don't necessarily lean into grief. We step away. You know, we tend to validate people who are stoic in the face of grief. You know, how often do you hear, like, she did so well at the funeral, she didn't even cry, you know? And so we make it very difficult for people to actually be vulnerable. And I think part of my intent in writing about the grief that I lived with, I mean, I lived with 10 years of anticipatory grief, because when my dad was diagnosed with HIV in 1985, it was a certain death sentence. And so it was, you know, 10 years of knowing he was going to die. It was just a matter of when. So I lived with that 10 years, and then, you know, it took 20 years after his death for me to be ready to write about it. And it was something that I kind of boxed away, because people want to know that you're feeling better. They want to know that you're okay. And I get that. I mean, we all struggle when other people suffer. But I think when we don't talk about those things, when we don't put those things out there for other people to see, we leave people so isolated and alone in their stories, especially their stories of grief and loss. And so, you know, part of my motivation for becoming vulnerable was knowing that if somebody else out there is feeling lonely in their grief and they read my book and feel a little less lonely, then I've done something good, right? And, you know, I always say the same thing, that you know, the hardest parts for me in the book, I have this 6-day period where my dad is dying, and I knew I had to write it, but it was the last thing I wrote, you know, because I tell my writing students this all the time as well, that we all have thresholds of what we're able to handle and what we're able to cope with. And if you're writing, or if you're thinking about, you know, approaching a difficult story, it's really important that you listen to your thresholds. And so, you know, vulnerability doesn't just happen one day that you're like, okay, now I'm ready to expose everything. It's incremental, it takes time, and you are the one who has to kind of control that along the way.
Thank you for that.
I just want to add, if you saw me pointing to myself like a crazy person, it's because I was one of those people who was helped in my grief by her book.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't want to interrupt Donna.
What I was going to say, just in terms of being vulnerable and dealing with the process of grief, for a lot of people who do it orally, storytelling, or even as you write it down, I lost my mother to Alzheimer's about 2 years ago. And she ended up on a locked ward because she became a giant toddler, basically. And one of the things that I agreed with myself when she first started going through this, was that I would meet her wherever she was. I didn't need her to remember me, because I can remember me. And I would remember her for her. So that as we went through this process, wherever she was, if she showed up as a 6-year-old, we were 6. If she showed up and she thought my grandmother was down the hall, then grandma was down the hall. If she showed up and didn't remember who I was, then I was visiting from next door. So that the entire 3 years that she was going through this process where she was misplacing pieces of herself, I could sort of slot in and be part of that. And I spent so much time doing that I didn't get a chance to grieve for her, because a lot of people grieve while the process is happening. And then, as you said, someone goes, and then you have a chance to just let everything go, or sometimes people shut it off. I was so busy trying to be in the moment that I forgot to look at the big picture. And it took me a while to find a way to begin to tell those stories. And I still don't put those stories on stage yet, because I'm not ready to be that vulnerable with an audience. So it will come in stages, and I've put pieces. There are really funny pieces and really intense pieces, but it usually takes a while to process grief enough to be able to share it with someone. And that's what you're talking about, sharing in grief.
Yeah, it was 13 years for me. And you know, to answer your question, Laura Beth, I think I discovered your book because I Googled books on grief or grief memoirs, and thank goodness I did. And you know, my friendship that I have developed with Melanie is such a perfect example of, you know, I teach a class now with Modern Prairie with Melissa Gilbert's brand, and my partner who teaches with me, Stacy Lauren, is here today. And one of the things that we teach is bucket listing, but really it's just getting out of your comfort zone, you know. And I read a book, I think the year my dad died, called The Alchemist. I think everybody knows The Alchemist, but there was one line in particular that always stood out to me. I believe I might be messing this up, but I believe the way it goes is when you follow your bliss, all the universe supports you. Or when you follow your dreams, or something like that. It was so like mind-blowing to me at 25, you know, like, wait, it's not selfish for me to go after my dreams. Like if I go after what I care about and what, you know, lights me up inside, that's a thing the universe wants me to do. How crazy. And I think going after this bucket list and writing the book and taking the step that I think we're all talking about here of being that vulnerable and putting that story out into the world, that's so scary to do, because you're like, oh, what if nobody likes it? What if people get mad? What if I tell it wrong? What if, for me personally, what if my writing can't live up to this amazing thing that has now fallen into my lap, essentially? But when you actually do it and you take the steps to do it, you're not ever alone. And people like the wonderful Melanie Brooks will show up to help you. I mean, this book would not exist without writing hard stories. It just wouldn't.
Okay, so I definitely want to follow up on this because I know each of you have had different experiences beyond your book. How has this affected those around you, whether it be family, whether it be loved ones, or just random readers that have come into your life? How has this affected you and your next steps?
I am now a public speaker. I'm a teacher. I teach people how to be intentional with how they live, and that's so different from how I used to be. I just used to think that my life was sort of defined by these external things, and now I feel it's more like I'm radiating out what's inside, and what's happening around me is very much a direct result of whatever's happening inside of me. And because of that, you know, relationships in my life changed somewhat because of the steps that I took to tell this story, but in good ways, you know, because I'm being...
That had to be a little scary, I would think.
Of course, yes, but you know, I told someone once who was telling me her father had died in a motorcycle crash, and she wanted to write something about it, and she felt like she wasn't really supposed to talk about it with her family, and she was afraid. You know, the thing that people always say is, I won't be loved anymore. I won't be lovable, because we think we have to be a certain thing, you know, for the people around us to love us. And I told her, I said, the kind of love that you will receive by being the real you does not compare to what you're receiving right now. And it might take time for people to adjust to the fact that now I'm presenting as the real me everywhere I go. But that's okay, because I can't give love to other people as well unless I'm being true to who I really am.
So I am currently in the midst of writing my third book, and it's called Telling It Like It Is: The Risks, Realities, and Rewards of Publishing Our Stories. And it's kind of addressing all of those kind of questions you were just asking. And I'm going back to kind of the model of my first book, where I'm interviewing 20 memoirists who have all written, you know, personal stories and published them, to talk about kind of what they encountered along the way. And the reason that I'm doing it is because I encountered some really wonderful things in publishing my story. I mean, I've gotten to speak to audiences all over the United States and in Canada. I've had plenty of people write to me and tell me, what my book meant to them, and it's opened up broader opportunities for me to teach, which is what I love to do. But I've also encountered some really difficult things. My family was supportive at the surface level, but they were not thrilled that this book is out in the world. And it's not because I've revealed anything in this book that was not already known. So my father was diagnosed with HIV in 1985 he got tainted blood during open heart surgery from a blood transfusion. And for 10 years, we kept that story a secret for the 10 years before his death. 6 months before he died, my mom and dad wrote a book. So I didn't write this book to reveal the secret. It was already known. It was already out there. But I think because that official story existed, that was kind of the family narrative that everyone bought into. And because I'm telling a very different story, because I'm telling it through my lens of starting when I'm 13 to now being an adult and what it was like to live through all of that, it changes kind of the family dynamic and rules a little bit. So I've had some really difficult conversations with family members. I've had some really difficult interactions. And yet, people have said, would you still do it? I absolutely would, because again, it's back to that word authenticity, right? I don't want to pretend that we're something we're not, and I don't want to pretend I'm someone I'm not. And I've been able to be more authentic in writing this book, but that doesn't mean it's not hard. And those are things you have to weigh as you're working on this kind of story.
And also, you talked about setting your limits of what you're able to do, and you obviously are doing that about your mother too, because you're still working on it before it even hits the stage.
Yeah, what's really fascinating about listening to you talk about writing these memoirs, what's fascinating is that the only thing I have ever done for 37 years is be a storyteller. This is the only job that I have had. And one of the things that you learn really early in this field is that if you aren't vulnerable, if you aren't your authentic self in front of an audience, they will catch you quick. And they reflect something interestingly strange back at you. The thing that becomes, you create a kind of relationship with an audience as you perform with them. And so you have to decide what kind of vulnerability you have. And I have stories that I do not tell because I would ask my family members, would this be okay if I put this on stage? And some of them say, absolutely not. Most of the stories that I do tell about family, they're okay with. There are a few I will not tell until the people who experience those things are no longer with us. So as a performer, since the stories are alive right in front of people and they're interacting with them right away, I also have to be careful about how I tell what I tell. Talk about good things and bad things. I told a story at one point about a fight I had with my mother. For 6 months, people walked up to me and went, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" We don't realize how important it is to share our trauma stories.
And I also think, it's really important that we distinguish the fact, like, I'm not telling my family story.
Yeah.
I'm telling my story of being in that family, right? I am not trying, I have 3 brothers who all had parallel experiences to my own, but I would never, ever attempt to try to explain what it was like for them, because I don't know. I wasn't in their minds. I wasn't in their lives in the sense of knowing what it was like to be them in that circumstance. I would never try to explain what it was like for my mother, right? And so I think that's the other position we have to take, is to recognize we're telling our story and we have agency over our own stories, right? Those stories will intersect with other people. It's inevitable that they do, but we have to be careful how much of somebody else's story we bring into our own.
So,
Can I
Donna,
add something really quick?
Yes, you certainly can.
Yeah,
Go.
I just wanted to add to what she said, because Melanie, you did such a wonderful job. That was one of the things I remember noting when I was reading A Hard Silence. But I liked what you said too, Donna, because I think earlier we were talking about this, about my choice to write about my dad's cross-dressing. And the reason I did that was because, as we were discussing earlier, I didn't know about his cross-dressing until I was 18, when my mom told me because I had asked her and she felt I was old enough to know. But it wasn't the fact that my dad had a double life as a cross-dresser that had impacted me. It was the fact that he felt he had to hide it, because he was teaching me that by example, even though I didn't even know. I didn't know there was a secret, but I then became someone who also hid things. So when I say I was always obsessed with fitting in, what I mean is, I would hide my depression. I would hide that I'd been in a hospital for 6 days to get off medications. And I could gradually see how I was becoming more and more like him, but with my own secret. So I think it's really interesting what gets passed down until we decide we're going to break that cycle.
That's really important, and I think what Donna brought up too, that verbal presentation can sometimes take on a different aspect. I know you recorded an audio book for this. Was that experience the same as writing, or was it a completely different animal for you when you're telling the story?
I mean, I became very proud of myself all of a sudden. I would be like walking to the train station after being in New York for the day and recording, and I'd be like, this is a best-selling book. Like, I had enough distance. Did you have that experience too?
Yeah, I had I'd read a sentence I wrote and be like, that was so good.
Yeah, so there was a little a little hubris, a little bit of that.
You have to keep some.
But also, there were a lot of passages where I was experiencing the emotions of having written them a second time. And I have heard many times people have told me that they prefer the audiobook version of my book because I am expressing the real emotions that I felt when I wrote it. And there are a lot of very emotional passages. And the other thing I liked about it was that there's something about reading the story out loud and getting to have that emotion on tape. I don't know, is it on tape? I don't know, whatever it is.
Sure.
Whatever you
Digital,
call it.
right?
Yeah. But there's something about that where you really feel secure because you've communicated it all. You've communicated how you felt, and there's no, there could be no like wondering, well, what did she mean when she wrote that? Because it's like you've expressed it.
I think that's part of what Melanie was talking about with agency too. It's just one more layer for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about audiobooks though, Melanie? Because I think we both love audiobooks.
I will. I mean, I'm a huge audiobook fan, and I love nothing more than a memoir read by the memoirist. And it felt very strange for me to imagine like somebody else reading my memoir. And I know many memoirists who do that because they don't feel comfortable reading, but it would have been really strange to have somebody else's voice expressing my experience. But I just wanted to say, so my recording process of my memoir was really interesting because I did it with a friend of mine who is a radio producer. She had done one other audiobook, but she'd done it remotely. So the person sent her the audio clips and she mastered them and everything. But I suggested that I come to her house and we do it. And so she set up a recording studio in her closet. And so I was in a closet and she was on the other side of the wall, and she had like a wooden spoon or something that she would tap on the wall when I stumbled or if she wanted me to repeat something. But there was something about being in that closet by myself with my words that, felt very surreal to me. And in many ways, I felt like I experienced the story in a very visceral way because of that. And there were a lot of difficult moments, a lot of moments where I had to kind of take a minute, after having read them, and, and things that I had read plenty of other times, but something about being by myself in that space. But I think you want me to talk about the fact that I am a firm believer that listening to audiobooks is reading. I think that there are different camps on that, but as a writer myself and a teacher of writing, and I firmly believe that we are reading when we are listening to audiobooks. It's just another tool that gives us access to the words and to the stories.
One of the main focuses of my career has been language acquisition, literacy, and vocabulary building. And one of the things I talk about, especially with young children or people who are emergent readers, whatever their age, is that there are two different processes, right? There's the mechanics of reading, and then there's all the higher level thinking skills. And if you're learning how to read, when you are doing the mechanics, your brain is so focused on the words, how they sound, how the letters are put together, that it's not doing all of the extra work. And when you remove the mechanics, the brain can actually work on comprehension. It can work on building predictive behavior. It can work on figuring out what packaging, scope, and sequence is going on. So as a storyteller, telling stories out loud, it does build literacy. It is definitely a huge part of reading. So yes, I completely agree with you that audiobooks, listening to audiobooks, you learn the process of literacy by listening to it, not necessarily just saying all the words correctly.
I know many authors that I've interviewed also have said that they will read what they've written for the cadence, for the pull, for the flow, all of those things. So I think it is very important, and I did enjoy your audiobook. So I'm glad that you
Thank
both
you.
did your own memoirs. All right, there was a mindset that you talked about, Laura, abundance versus scarcity. And I thought that really hit me, and it's made me think, and I've talked to my husband about it, I've talked to friends about it, because it's really a shift in mindset. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about this and how it has affected you?
Yeah, I think I started developing this concept. It's really a way of life. Because I gradually began to realize, I think I must have been, I don't know, like 15 or 20 list items in at this point, like about year 2. I started to realize that the list items would always work out when I was humble and if I was kind and promoting somebody else. It never worked out if I was like, oh, beat a #1 seed in a tennis tournament, that's going to happen today. I already played tennis, I played on my tennis team in high school. Let's just get this one done. Like, I could not ever treat a list item like it's just check it off, get it over with, get to the next thing, which is how we do tend to live a lot of the time, right? And this was a sacred mission, so it was not going to work that way with this. So I gradually started to understand each list item was going to work out one way or another. Some of them might have taken 4 years, some of them might have taken an afternoon, but I would get there because my dad was not going to let me fail. That was really what I started to understand and believe, which was now healing worries I had as a teenager when he was alive, that sometimes he could be unreliable, or I wasn't sure if I could call him and ask for something. So one of the things that started to help me when I would be in the middle of one, a particularly difficult one, for example, writing this book, getting an agent, getting it published, because #3 was write and have a few novels published on my dad's list. I would start to teach myself to look at every disappointment as just part of the abundance. It's just part of it. Like, I would fail before I would succeed every time. And I mean, it even got to a point where, like, my first agent, I had 2 agents, and my first one, I ended up switching, and he was disappointed when he first couldn't sell it. It was just on idea alone. None of the book had been written yet. And I was like consoling him. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's a list item. I fail before I succeed. It's gonna be okay. But that's interesting, right? Because here's someone who was very successful in his field, and how many people get to a place of success and they think they got there because they invested in the things that definitely worked out. But really, it's when you invest in the things that are not working out very well that you stretch yourself and you start to recognize what it is you're meant to do. So you have to embrace those failure-esque moments, because they're really not. You're learning. And remember, the abundance mindset, what that really means is there's really enough for everybody. Like, just because somebody else succeeds doesn't mean there isn't enough for me. Instead, what I learned how to do was, whenever a friend of mine said they had just gotten a book deal. I had a friend who became Twitter famous, and she had someone offer her a book deal the next day. And I thought, what? I've been trying to figure this thing out for a while. Could this happen? And then I thought, no, Laura. And I went on Instagram and I shared one of her hashtags and I promoted her. It just became this instinctive thing I would do, where instead of being jealous, I would be supportive. So it's become a practice. And then the other element of that is, you have the gifts that you have that you've been given, that you were born with, so that you can give to other people. It's not so you can compete with other people. And so that's been, I'm still living that way. It's a major shift, but it means taking more risks in life sometimes because you have to risk looking like a failure.
I do love that definition of a gift. Did y'all come away with something that you weren't expecting after writing your memoir or telling a certain story?
Really quickly, if I could, there's actually an African point of view called the philosophy of abundance. And basically it means if I have something and you need it and I don't share it with you and something happens to you, that's on me. We are responsible for each other. And the 501c3 that I actually helped co-found was built on that very concept, that you have a philosophy of abundance. There's plenty of stuff to go around. You can find any storyteller you want. They look different. We are all different. We do different things. We're not competing with each other. We are holding each other up. So that was lovely.
That's beautiful. We need to talk.
Well, and if that doesn't say one city, one book, I don't know what does. So I just find that beautiful.
I wanted to, before I answer that other question you just asked, I wanted to comment on, Laura is the epitome of an excellent, what we call an excellent literary citizen, right? Because, the literary world is a place where there can be some cattiness and there can be some competition because everybody's kind of striving for the same goals, right? And I think, what's wonderful about Laura is, look at us, look at her. She's brought me here. She's got Donna here. She's bringing other writer friends over the course of the next 2 weeks because she recognizes that, she didn't do it alone. And so she's paying it forward for everyone else. And I feel that way a lot, from my first book. I approached like New York Times bestsellers, and I was just like a writing student. I had not published a thing. I had no publication credits to my name when I was approaching some of these writers, and they were so incredibly generous to me. And I made a commitment early on, like before this became a book, when I first started talking to these writers, that if I ever am in a position where I've published a book and maybe I can help another writer, I made it that commitment, like I will always do that. And Laura is somebody who does that so well. She's so generous. She's so incredibly smart in how she works with her book. All of her success that she's had is, so much of it is self-made, because she's somebody who is a tireless worker. But she's also somebody who's totally willing to share that insight, to share those contacts, to share that connection, right? And so she's a beautiful model of what it means to be a literary citizen. And I often think about, that the reason that we join literary community, that we get in community as writers, is because it's so much better to have people than not have people, right? And so that's something I just want to compliment her, and it's why she's so deserving of this residency and being here. But in answer to your question of did anything change, for me, I wrote my memoir out of carrying something in silence for 30 years of my life, right, that I had never talked about and rarely talked about it to other people because it always felt like, a story that would suck the air from the room, and I always felt like I had to apologize when people would ask me how my dad died. And, and I think about the thing that has changed for me is that I am more myself now than I have ever been able to be in my life. And it's because the thing that always stood in the way as the barrier, right? Like I could only get so far with people when I'm carrying kind of this secret and carrying this silence. That barrier has gone away. And so I feel like there's this open space now where I've told my story and people come in and tell me their stories. And that's the most wonderful gift that I've gotten. The amazing stories that I've heard from other people simply because I've shared my story is probably the biggest reward that has come.
Such a gift. I will start with Donna, and I'll come this way. I think this may be our last question before we get to rapid fire, but let's talk about libraries a little bit. and just what has libraries meant for you in your life, and how has it affected you in your work now?
I am a huge advocate for libraries. I do summer reading in libraries. I work with librarians all over the world. I was a reader as a kid. I spent my recesses in the library. And I'm actually, at the end of the week, I'll be at the NCSLMA, which is the North Carolina School Library and Media Association. So I'll be doing a workshop there with librarians. I have worked with library associations all over the country as well. My work would not exist as it is, as a performer, as a writer. Librarians have, I had a book that came out years ago called The Big Spooky House that got terrible reviews. And if you get terrible reviews for a book, it's like someone walking up to you and saying, your baby is ugly. But it stayed in print, and people still love it because librarians stood up for it. And librarians talk about how much kids love it. And I still have people come up to me, that's my favorite book. That's another thing that's cool, right? You have written somebody's favorite book. I just think that's like the coolest thing in the world. But yes, libraries have always been a huge part of my work.
Ditto. Yeah. I loved going to the library when I was little. I loved finding the latest books and kind of some of my favorite series when I was little. I took my kids to the story hour every week. It was just kind of that gift. And, for my book tour, many of the venues that I did book talks in were libraries, because there's something about a library space that people are coming, because they're readers in general anyway, and one of my best friends is a librarian, and the programs that she's able to do and put on, are so amazing. And I hope that people continue to access libraries in the ways, and that libraries are able to give to the same kind of programming that they have, because it's so valuable to communities.
Ditto.
I have a funny library story.
Go for it. We want it.
All right, so anyone who has read this book is going to find this completely shocking, I'm sure. I believe it was a year before we found my dad's list, I was starting to freelance more as a journalist. And my main experience at that point, I always say I think this is because I had a story that needed to come out of me that I hadn't permitted to come out yet. My main experience at that point was articles for the Associated Press, like a small magazine here or there, but I became a TV recapper. And I think now, looking back on it, I was always recapping shows about mysterious dads. It was just like, oh, Mad Men? Okay. Oh, Lost? Yeah, I'm on that. You got it. True Detective. Okay, I'm going to cover that one. But then I got an opportunity to write an actual real article based on my Mad Men recapping for 538, which is Nate Silver. I don't know if it still exists, but Nate Silver from the New York Times used to do this thing called 538. And it was just an article that was based on stats. So he would take a chart and use that as something you're proving, but he liked to prove really weird things with his statistics. So I decided I was going to go back through every single women's magazine that ever existed through the 70s and 60s and see if the beauty myth was true. Naomi Wolf wrote about this thing called the beauty myth, where she claimed that oppression of women in the 50s had more to do with being a housewife and convincing women to buy domestic goods, washers, dryers, etc. But in the 60s and 70s, it sort of shifted into being about beauty and, being sexy and being a certain whatever. So I wanted to see if I could retrace those magazines just based on the ads. Could I actually watch the shift happen from washing machines to beauty products? And I did. I'm writing down 60% of Good Housekeeping has this, this, and this in 1964. But the crazy part about it is that I would cry and apologize to my husband that I had to go into New York City for 5 hours on Saturday and research this stuff. And we were newly engaged actually at the time. And he would be like, what is wrong with you? You're a writer. Go to the library. It's not a big deal.
Apologizing.
And I'd be like, but we're going to get married, and that's not, I can't leave you alone all weekend. I can't go in and do this. I mean, it's funny now given, everything that I've done, but that's who I was at that time because I thought, again, living up to an image, of which is ironic given what I was actually researching. They never did end up publishing it, but they gave me a $250 kill fee because I had just put in that many hours.
Well, Melanie did say you were a tireless worker, so.
Well, sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not.
No, I think I just want to say thank you, especially to the Greensboro Public Library for putting on this One City, One Book. It's a fabulous program. I hope it continues. Yes, big applause for everybody that's had any part of this, and I really do hope it continues. Beth, do we have time for rapid fire? Okay. All right. Are y'all ready? Everybody have your microphone up. I'm going to.
Okay.
All right.
How does it work?
I'm going to say options and you give answers and we'll go this way. Okay. Morning glory or nightshade?
Me? Nightshade.
Morning glory.
Morning glory.
Do you have a green thumb?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Favorite place to write?
On the couch.
In a coffee shop.
In my library at home.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
A what?
Do y'all know what that is? A plotter is someone that plots it all out. A pantser is someone that flies by the seat of their pants.
I'm a pantser who pretends to be a plotter.
Good one.
Pantser.
Pantser.
All right. And the last one, what's the place you'd like to travel?
France.
Canada.
Home.
Ooh, good ones. All right, we do have a couple minutes, I think, for questions for the audience. Does anybody have a question that they are dying to ask one of these fabulous authors? I will say, and I forgot to ask this earlier. So can I ask another question? Do we have time? Okay. Thin places. Can you talk a little bit? I just want to know thin place, how you talk about that in the novel, or not the novel, the memoir, and how important that was for that point in the book. Because I do feel like, explain it to the audience and how that fits in, because I do feel like it's an overarching theme for you.
It's funny that you called it a novel. I know. Because my dad wrote, write, and have a few novels published. Yeah. So it's a memoir that sort of reads like a novel. I feel like we're in one right now. It really is. I've gotten chills a few times tonight. A thin place it's an Irish idea. I believe the way it goes is that heaven and earth are usually far apart, but in a thin place they're much closer, something like that. I wish I could remember exactly how they say it. But a thin place is just, it's a place, but it also could be a moment in your life. My dad used to like to say life is lived in little moments. And I think it's like that, sometimes we discover these places when we're traveling. It doesn't have to be like an ancient ruin or a temple or a church, but oftentimes it is. Usually it's just some place in nature that was, maybe Druids were there at one point, Like I'm always looking for like one of them is the Camino in Spain. I really want to, that's on my bucket list. That's one of the things
Mine
I really
too.
want to do. Yeah.
Trip.
Together.
Let's do it.
I'm going to do it by age 54, the age my dad was when he died. But I spend a lot of my time now sort of seeking out, whether deliberately or accidentally, thin places, because there's just something like, ooh, about it. Like I feel more connected to the divine, but also to my soul when I'm in them.
And definitely, I think the Piedmont Hall was a thin place for all of us tonight.